A long time ago, when I was a dumb missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. Turned out he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford. He had to have been in his late 50s to 60s, it was hard to tell, because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He feigns interest in what we were peddling and asks for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but is clearly more excited to be speaking English with two Americans. We meet up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road, or some other public, but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leader for the local unit, about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we bring him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly knew who we were talking about, and cautioned us to stay away from this guy. Apparently he's a bit unstable, and once or twice a year will start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I can't believe that the bishop is referring to the same person, and we continue meeting with him. I don't know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy, between his disheveled appearance, flat out lying to us, and other small signs, he had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put our finger on, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally, he would supposedly run into us, right outside of the house we lived in. One night, after talking about his house in the jungle and how nice and wonderful it was out there, he agrees to have us meet him at the side of the road in front of his house, so he can guide us down the path to his house. The time arrives and we are waiting patiently by the side of the road, but Bickford is very late. Just as we are about to leave, he arrives, and he took us down the path into the jungle. At this time, it's very dark, and we are walking through waist-high foliage. This area had roads and cities, but was right next to a large reservoir, and if you left the main roads, could become very isolated and overgrown very quickly. As we walked down this path for what seemed like forever, I kept walking into spider webs with my face and almost losing my cool. I hate spiders, and the ones in Brazil were the stuff of nightmares. Luckily, I carried a small LED flashlight, but it seemed awfully underpowered out there in the jungle. When we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we couldn't believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing, where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said welcome home and led us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame, which had no door, may I add, and saw that all furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He begins showing us the main room inside the front door. That's when I noticed them. Notes, written in chalk. On every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, on the ceiling, in a tiny frenzied scrawl. When I trained my light on the notes and started to read them, I almost threw up. Most of the notes were variations on, Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop, I did it again. These notes were with a month and date written next to them, and the most creepy of all, the names of several children, with their ages, and graphic inappropriate details about them. We tried so hard to not mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small talk questions about the rotting food on the stove, or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement, anything but mentioning the notes. I can't speak for my companion, but I was freaking the hell out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at DEFCON 1 as well, and we decided to get the hell out of there. We made some excuse as it was getting late, that we needed to get home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back, on the condition that we would come visit again. As we get out of the house, he suddenly remembers that he knows a shortcut, and tells us to follow him. The direction he's trying to lead us is clearly not the way back to the road, it only led deeper into the jungle. We politely decline, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I couldn't care less about the spiders. When we got back onto the road, and realized we were safe, we looked at each other, as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we just saw, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me, nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound, I was so scared. My companion called our leaders, who called their leaders. And we ended up moving about a week later, but not before making an entry in our area book, the book that stays in the area, listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. I realized the entire ordeal sounds completely cliché, everything about Bickford did. That's why after our second conversation with him, I started recording every time we would meet with my digital camera. I would set it on audio record mode and stick it in my pocket. I was camped out for the day, planning to spend the night on Cochiti Lake, southwest of Santa Fe, New Mexico. We were on the water, just north of the dam and a little down the road from it. There was almost no one around, and my new girlfriend, who would years later become my wife, and I spent the day smoking and doing couples things. We also clothed down to our underwear twice during the day and swam out amongst the sparse reeds that lined the lake. We could hear cars zooming by on Route 22, but we were safely out of view from the road. After several hours, we noticed movement around a box truck that was parked on a little rise away from the water. We didn't think much of it, even welcomed other campers in the area, but my girlfriend noticed a couple of times that a man was crouching in bushes near the truck and looking at us through binoculars. After catching him at it 3 times, I told her to put our stuff in the car, and I grabbed my stuff as well, and we made off for it. He popped right up and started running toward us yelling, "Hey, how are you guys? I have Mota. Do y'all like Mota? Because we have really good Mexican stuff. I saw you smoking, and I bet you'd like our Mota." I approached him while my girlfriend cut behind me toward our car, and she said something about how maybe we shouldn't hang out with him. Old guy in the desert, free drugs. Doesn't sound like anything good can come out of it. The guy was rangy and wrinkled. He looked low class and too old to be offering 22-year-olds drugs in the desert. Also, he was noticeably drunk. His face was a gin blossom, and he walked like a cowboy. He kept coming towards us. I told my girlfriend under my breath to get to our car fast. And I shouted to the man, "No, we don't want any Mota, we have to go." He kept coming over. He was quickly in my space, putting his hand on my shoulder and walking me back toward his box truck. "Hey man, it's good to see you guys out here. Not many people from Santa Fe get out here, and we are having a party tomorrow. You should stay for it. We're setting up a big lake party, with my friends," he said to me. As I got close, I saw that the box truck was a trailer, and there was an old gold-colored Ford truck just over the little rise it was on. I asked about his friends, and he said they were coming up on motorcycles early the next day for a big party. Luckily, I was really serious about this girl, and the last thing in the world I wanted to do was spend our desert vacation partying with elderly bikers. He also told me that his wife was coming out, and that I'd like her a lot. He talked about swapping our girls. I instantly told him we were leaving after he said that. I shook off his arm, heading towards our car. As I got back to our car, that gold truck drove up the road we were on, almost cutting us off. I swerved around it, not even stopping as a young and dark-haired man jumped out waving his hands at us. In retrospect, I think he was waving a badge. That was Mr. Ray's approach. This little inconvenience happened in late July 1997. I think it was a Thursday when that old asshole and his little buddy tried to assault and murder my family. The future mother of my children and I spent the next week carelessly trekking around Four Corners and south-central Colorado. We spent several nights camping in mountain wilderness, but avoided the desert after that. I didn't think about that old man again until I happened to be watching Cable One on a Saturday afternoon, in the fall of 2009. My ex-wife and myself are divorced now, and she has custody of the kids, and I spend tons of time using the computer and watching TV. Middle age is like that sometimes. A show came on when I was playing Fallout 3. It was called I Survived, and it documented the escape of Cynthia Vigil from David Parker Ray and his girlfriend Cindy Hendy. Little details jumped out at me through the Saturday afternoon haze of weekend malaise and video gaming. When I saw the goddamned photos of David Parker Ray and his accomplices, I was scared, grateful, and excited. I had gotten a Christmas gift 13 years ago that I never knew I've had. I was gifted with not dying at the hands of a lunatic sexual torture addict, and I didn't even know it. In retrospect, I think Mr. Ray was suggesting that I should sleep with his girlfriend Cindy, and trade my girlfriend for her. David Parker Ray's friends were his instruments of inappropriate torture with which he claims to have taken the lives of 60 people. They were actually there the whole time, inside that box trailer. His daughter's boyfriend, Dennis Roy Yancey, was the man who drove up in the truck to stop us. He was probably flashing a badge, as everyone feels that Ray used his badge from his job as a mechanic at a New Mexico state prison to entice victims into submission. Also, it is thought that he managed to hide the results of his murderous rampage by removing the organs from their corpses, filling them with rocks, sewing up the body cavity, and sinking them into lakes in New Mexico and Arizona. Interestingly, while Ray had apparently been taking lives since the 1950s, police believe that the other man we saw that day, Dennis Roy Yancey, had killed his first man on, or about July 5, 1997. I attend a uni outside my city and therefore I rent a student accommodation throughout the year. The contract for my accommodation ends before my last exam, which would be on the following week. I thought to myself I could go to the uni library, usually 24/7, the night before and spent an all-nighter, irresponsible, but last-minute revision is my savior. I get to the library at around midnight. I see that it is closed for emergency maintenance. I'm unsure of what happened. But at this point my plan is screwed and I'm thinking the best thing to do is to book a hotel and just study there. All the hotels around seemed way too pricey and I notice there's a hotel that's pretty cheap for the night. I walk for about 30 minutes on this long, dark, silent road. At this point I'm scared and notice a light at the end of the street being my hotel. Finally I think to myself, at least I'll be safer in there. Spoilers, I was not. I go into this old Victorian-like building and notice no one is at the reception. I ring the bell a couple of times until I see a tall, strange-looking man staring at me from the top of the stairs. I ask if he works there. He tells me he doesn't and is just another customer. He then proceeds to ask me a lot of personal questions. I answer truthfully but in a very vague manner. He then proceeds back up the stairs where I hear loud bangs followed by shouting. The reception staff then comes back to the reception, and I end up booking the room. As I go upstairs, I hear knocking on the door next to mine, followed by some shouting. I hear a few more knocks. Then I get a knock on my door. I open the door to see the strange man from before. He asks me if I'm alone and I tell him that I have a friend coming over in 5 minutes. I did not. He then asks if he could come in and I refuse. This then prompts him to try to force his way into the room, which I resist and close the door on him. There were about 10 minutes of peace before more knocking on my door. At this point I'm watching a YouTube video on my phone, with a bit of talking and not much background noise. Straight after the knock I hear footsteps going to another room knocking. I assumed the man thought that the voice from the YouTube video was my alleged visiting friend, making him hesitate and target the door next to mine. There were seconds of silence followed by large banging and the walls shaking. I was about to crap myself at this point. I hear screaming and shouting. I later find out that the weirdo was possibly a serial killer who was hiding knives and machetes, intending to kill someone that night. He broke down the door of the person next door and tried to kill the person staying there. The police came shortly after and took down statements and information. To my knowledge, the individual ran away. I do not know whether he got caught. He was in fact a prime suspect for a previous murder, and since then, I have never gone for a cheaper hotel, no matter the alternative distance or price. The information regarding him being a serial killer was given to me by the guy next door who returned to the police station a few times and claims he was informed that the individual was a prime suspect for a few incidents that happened some time before this event. I was scared, But being 19 at the time, I did not know whether that calling the police was the correct decision in that scenario, as at the time I assumed the issue was resolved, though I later found out that it clearly wasn't. The person next door did end up calling the police, and they questioned everyone on that floor and took down everyone's details. People are also wondering why I started watching a YouTube video 10 minutes later. Though it was not to deter the guy, it did work in my favor in that situation. I was actually trying to calm myself down, as I was hoping to get back to studying for my exam, which was literally hours away. At this point, I assumed that the situation was resolved. I wanted to leave the hotel, but I was scared to leave the room. Though old, I did not think the doors were so fragile to be broken down so easily, and I was not aware that he was hiding knives. I also don't know how the guy next door was able to avoid getting hurt when his door got broken down by a guy wielding a knife, but he was totally fine. He was a little shaken, but seemed to calm down once the police arrived.